impressive. Very nice.
Avatar 2: The Way of Water is here, and I got the chance to check it out last week, and I'm not really ever one to jump the gun early on my takes on film, but not only was Avatar 2 a worthy successor to its monster of a predecessor, but I firmly believe it topped what came before. Avatar 2 is better than Avatar without question in my mind. Now, you guys know how I feel about the first Avatar. I spent 20 minutes diving into my thoughts on that film and the discourse surrounding it. I don't love the first Avatar, but I definitely do not hate it either. But one thing I can agree on is that the first Avatar is the best form of escapism ever put to screen, with the best CGI of any film almost still to this day. Certainly the best when it was released in 2009. I still think the first Avatar looks better 13 years on from its release than most of the big budget superhero garbage that we get today. But there was one thing I was thinking when watching Avatar in preparation for a sequel. How can they top these visuals? How can James Cameron replicate the escapism the first Avatar created? Well, I don't know why I was even wondering that, because to doubt James Cameron in any way is a fool's errand. Avatar 2 is the best looking film in terms of CGI effects that I have ever seen in my life. Pandora has never looked better. The Na'vi have never looked better. And my God, the underwater sequences. I mean, Jesus. You can tell why this film took 13 years to get made. But as the first Avatar would suggest, it doesn't begin and end with the visuals. Story and character are just as important, and those two elements held the first film back for a lot of people. But did Avatar 2 do the same thing? Yes, but also no. So strap in, because we are going in deep on why Avatar 2 is a flawed masterpiece. This video is sponsored by Yahaha, a new user-generated content creation platform for 3D multiplayer interactive experiences, where you can create and publish virtual experiences without any coding experience or server knowledge. You can even create a Pandora of your own if you wish. You just simply use the cool features and the components and all of the smart assets in the Yahaha Studio. There are around 1 million of them available. They also support multiplayer playing simultaneously, so if you want your friends, you can join in Yahaha games and other 3D events. They also host regular live sessions for the community to help creators improve their metaverse building skills. So you can go and follow their Twitch or check out their previous sessions on YouTube. So click the link in the description below to check out Yahaha for yourself, get creative, and start making your dream game all for free. The long-awaited venture back to Pandora has been 13 years in the making. A lot of people were wondering if this franchise was even still happening because it's been so long. Like, why could you possibly need 13 years to get a sequel out to a film that was so successful? Well, take just one glance at Avatar 2 and it's pretty damn easy to tell why. The visuals on display in this film are simply unparalleled. They are the best that you are going to see. There are moments when watching Avatar 2 where you can't actually fully comprehend that everything you're seeing is just ones and zeros. Pandora, the Na'vi, the creatures, it's never looked better than this. The way James Cameron plays with the colors of this exotic world and how the characters interact with it, the scope of this world, it's truly an experience in of itself. It is reminiscent of the first Avatar. The magic of the first film, for all its flaws, is captured once again here, but it just goes to a whole new level. Now, there is one common thing you'll often hear people mentioning when discussing these Avatar films, and that is escapism. Avatar 2 transports you to this world better than the first ever did. You feel the development in the technology straight away. There are genuinely moments in this film where the Na'vi actually look real. Like, seriously, after watching this film, go back and compare the Na'vi in the first Avatar with the sequel. You will realize very quickly just how far the technology has come. It's actually a little bit frightening how real the Na'vi look in this film. Watching the first Avatar, you can kind of tell that this is Sam Worthington, but not really. You can kind of tell that this is Zoe Saldana, but not really. In the sequel, and I noticed this straight away, you see the actor much more in the performance. There are cute mannerisms. You see the human underneath the facade of the big blue person. I noticed it with Quaritch in this film perhaps the most. Quaritch in the first film was very cheesy, very over the top, very stereotypical. His mannerisms are very, very easy to spot. And when in Avatar form, because he's in Avatar form for the entire film, you see every second of Stephen Lang's performance shine through the effects. That alone allows the viewer to care more about these characters. They don't look like this big blue monkey thing that talks and acts like a human. They actually feel real this time round. It's honestly a little bit terrifying just how well Cameron and the VFX artists managed to blend the Na'vi and actor elements together. And seeing as this film puts much more of an emphasis on character than its predecessor, this allows us as the viewer to care more about these characters, for the viewer to invoke some kind of connection with the character. So when there are character deaths or the characters are in peril, which, happens a lot in this film, you actually feel something. Because you can see these acute mannerisms that you'd normally get with a real performance. The facial mocap work is just on another level, and it makes you really care about the characters. And I think overall, it just really helped sell the emotion of the film. And that's one major takeaway I had from The Way of Water. I actually felt something. This cold, unemotional Australian arsehole actually felt something watching this film. I did not expect that. Another thing that I didn't expect was to actually not hate the social commentary. Now look, I'm not a very political person. I call it how I see it and don't align myself with any political view. I just don't care. I just want good stories. And if the political angle you want to throw into your art complements the story, then great. If it doesn't, then yeah, you're pretty much She-Hulk. Look, James Cameron loves the ocean, and there are moments where the film does preach the protection of the ocean, why it's important, as well as the bonds between sea creatures and man, or in this case, alien. Like, Cameron gets his point across, but he doesn't beat you over the head with it. And the subject matter that he's touching on here actually adds to the spectacle that this film is providing. It works in context with the story and the characters and the world. So it actually feels organic. The social commentary in this film, for me, is actually a rare occasion where a filmmaker these days, actually has something to say, but puts the story and character first. And for that alone, I salute you, Papa Jimbo. Moral of the story though, was Avatar 2 worth the wait? Yes. Cameron's eye for spectacle is once again at the forefront of this film's brilliance. Where some elements of the film are pretty bare bones, the way Cameron brings these worlds to life is awe-inspiring and almost makes you forget where the film falls to the wayside. So let's dive deep into the story and characters of Avatar 2. Because this is where the idea of flawed masterpiece begins to rear its head. Because the story and characters are the best and worst thing about this film. Let's talk about Jake Sully. Jake in the first Avatar cops a lot of hate from people. A lot of the hate comes from Sam Worthington's performance. As you know, he can be a little bit bland. But Jake as a character. His character in the first Avatar is often criticized for being a little bit dumb and just unworthy of being the lead in the biggest film of all time. I personally think Jake is a serviceable protagonist in the first film. But Jake in Avatar 2 is a very different character. With a much better performance by Sam Worthington, it must be said. He's much, much better here. Jake is much more stern in this film. He's obviously a father of multiple children, and he's the leader of the Omaticaya people, at least at the beginning of the film. I was honestly a little taken aback by just how well Jake's character was handled in this film. You really sense that he is a person with a military background. There are moments in the first Avatar where the character fits the military character type that they were going with, and then there's moments where he just doesn't, like they just completely forget that he's got a military background. But James Cameron really ran with that hardened military side of Jake's character in this film and played it into the treatment of his children. He's very harsh on them. He doesn't take any shit in this film, but he will protect his family at all costs. Even his sons refer to him as Sir throughout the entire film. You really feel like Jake has become the leader of not just the Omaticaya people, but his own family, which is such a stark contrast from the dumbass that he was at times in the first film. At the end of the day, this is a blockbuster that actually takes the time to develop its protagonist. Crazy, I know. Now, one thing that really surprised me with Jake in this film, however, is that he actually takes a bit of a back seat despite how well his character was done. He is the lead character of this film, but his children are clearly being set up as the future of this franchise. Loak and Kiri are given a lot to do in this film. Loak especially. He's the middle child of the family, and honestly, given how much he got to do in this film, I wouldn't be surprised if he became our eventual lead character further down the road. Luckily for this film, the child characters were very, very strong. Because the film had such a long runtime, clocking in at over 3 hours long, we had enough time with these characters to actually care. And speaking of actually caring, Quaritch. He returns as the film's main villain once again, and he'll be in the next one as well. Quaritch was perhaps the biggest surprise in this film for me in terms of pure character. In the first film, as we touched on earlier, he was a straight up cheesy stereotypical villain, and Stephen Lang clearly had a lot of fun playing the character.
Shut your pie hole.
Or what? Ranger Rick, you gonna shoot me?
I can do that.
But there was no real depth to the character. The best we got was an exposition dump on how we got the scars and why he likes them. That was pretty much it. That was the character. But in the sequel, they actually make him a proper fleshed out character. And to be honest, seeing as he's seemingly evolving into the franchise's big bad, probably a good idea, Jimbo. So he's now been resurrected due to events prior to his death in the first film, and he has the memories of Quaritch before that battle. As a result, he's now in a permanent Avatar body. Despite the contrived situation for him to even be in the film, Quaritch was one of the best parts of this film for me. His motivations are crystal clear. He wants Jake Sully dead. Clear, concise, simple, but effective. Quaritch felt like less of a looming threat in this film, but more of a force of nature that just won't stop until Jake is dead. It adds this sense of incoming dread as we see Jake and his family adapt to life with the Ocean Clan. We know that Quaritch will stop at nothing, and they add a layer of depth to the character by introducing the character of Spider, who is the son of Quaritch. Now, as Spider has grown up as an adoptive child of Jake's family, it added an interesting little dynamic that bonded the film's protagonist and antagonist together in some way. There are moments where the line Cameron decides to ride on Spider's loyalties get a little bit messy. There are moments where it looks like Spider is actually opening up to Quaritch, but then a scene later he's just not. It's kind of a little bit uneven. And it is a slight issue that I do have with the film, and I've seen a lot of people actually bring this up, and I tend to agree. And speaking of issues, one of the worst things about this film for me was actually Neytiri. Neytiri takes a back seat in this film. She does not have a lot to do, and that really did bug me. And this is where the flawed masterpiece comes into play. This character was so essential in the first film, and in this one, she's kind of just there because she's Jake Sully's wife. I understand that they want to push some of the child characters to the forefront a little bit more, but I feel like it came at the cost of Neytiri. So although I like these new child characters that are being focused on, it kind of comes at the cost of Neytiri being a key aspect of the film. She gets a couple of moments, but considering she was so integral to the first film, it is a little hard to process just how in the background she was. But my final frustration with the character aspect of the film, Kiri. Now, I know I said I really liked this character, and I do. I like this character a lot, but she is voiced by Sigourney Weaver. This was incredibly jarring and pulled me out of the film multiple times. I understand the character has ties to Grace from the first film, but hearing a processed Sigourney Weaver voice, who is 73 years old by the way, coming out of the mouth of a child was incredibly distracting. And it's an unfortunate gripe with an otherwise really good character. But that's it for the characters. Let's talk about the story of Avatar 2. Now, the first Avatar, let's be honest, the story is one of the hottest talking points of that film, and I will be comparing the two of them directly later. But the story of Avatar 2, it's incredibly simple. Jake learns that the Sky People have returned to Pandora with the military led by a resurrected Quaritch, who's hunting down Jake and killing and destroying everything in his path. So Jake takes it upon himself to leave the forest of Pandora and take his family elsewhere to seek safety. The story is less of a cliche than the first film, but there are some slight issues I have with it. It is a very thin story. There isn't a whole lot of depth to it at all, but it's enough. Look, we're watching a sci-fi blockbuster with state-of-the-art effects with big blue people riding fish that fly. I don't need Citizen Kane to have a good time here. The story was thin, but it works fine for what this film is. It's a big special effects blockbuster not a thought-provoking character piece focusing on the dichotomy of man. It's big blue monkey people riding a fish with wings. I know exactly what I'm watching. And that's why I had such a great time with Avatar 2. The story is serviceable for the film being told. Even if the story was one-dimensional, I still found myself giving a shit about these characters. I still found myself in awe at the visuals on screen. I respected what this film had to say. It's just a simple story that services the film around it. Now, there are elements of the story that I kinda wish Cameron maybe refined a little bit. Jake leaving Pandora instead of staying and fighting, that I can see people taking an issue with. However, I like the idea of the family being the fortress wherever they go, but I feel like they could have done a slightly better job at forcing Jake to leave Pandora. Now, the story of this film, however, lies within the family. This is a family-orientated film. Because of that element, it allows what is a pretty thin story to punch well above its weight in generating emotion. I really did feel something watching this film, which surprised me. When characters died in the first Avatar, I was probably cackling like some kind of psychopath. But when characters died in this film, this was more what I was like. Granted, the death of the older brother, I called that 30 minutes before it even happened. I don't know if my foresight for this story is next level or that the seeds planted just made it super predictable. I don't know, but regardless, it was still very effective. And it really did rile me up and got me excited for that final showdown between Jake and Quaritch, which is a feeling that I never had during the first film. It was just whatever happens, happens. Okay, cool. But overall, the story was just what it needed to be. And through the time spent with interesting and likable characters, it allowed what was admittedly a very thin story pack a really powerful emotional punch. One of the major questions surrounding this film is it better than the first Avatar? Well, let's unpack that for a second. First off, let's talk visuals. The Way of Water is obviously the better of the two. A lot of people, including myself, are a little concerned with just how much better could the visual effects get than the first film. But The Way of Water really did go that step above. Pandora's forest, the Hallelujah Mountains still look incredible, but the ocean scenes are literally jaw-dropping. The frame rate changes help add to the awe factor of the visuals and make things feel a bit more real. But Cameron's eye for spectacle did not slack off in this sequel. It is the most impressive film visual effects wise I have ever seen. CGI has never looked better than it does with The Way of Water. Now let's talk story. The first Avatar, like I mentioned, cops hate for being Dances with Wolves in space, Fern Gully, Pocahontas 2, you know, blah blah blah. I made my thoughts on this critique very clear in my Avatar video essay, where I spent a large portion of that video breaking that point down. I think it's an absolutely shambolic critique that requires a huge level of hypocrisy to even hold any merit. But the story of the first Avatar, yes, it is Dances with Wolves in space, but that is a cool concept. It's a tried and tested story, and it works fine with the first Avatar. The Way of Water's story, though, strays off the path of familiar stories and goes out of its way to make it simple, yet effective. Certain elements of the story could have been tightened up, yes, but the story was exactly what it needed to be for the film that Cameron wanted to make. And despite the story being spread relatively thin, it still packs a very severe emotional punch. I think The Way of Water just nudges out the first Avatar for its story. It's never been a particularly strong element for these Avatar films, but it works well enough. Now, character-wise, I think The Way of Water shines way above its predecessor. Jake becomes an infinitely better character in this film despite taking a backseat throughout majority of the film's second act. Quaritch takes on some extra layers as the film's main antagonist, and I am a very firm believer of your film only being as good as the villain. So Quaritch as a villain in this film, getting those extra layers onto his character really helped to elevate the entire film for me. The first Avatar is full of character stereotypes. Some of them work well enough for the story, some of them are just plain bad. Avatar is often panned for how poor some of its characters are, but I'd be surprised if people held the same criticism for its sequel. Cameron pulled no punches in widening the scope of this film visually, but character-wise, there is a wider variety of characters to care about, and most of them you actually do, surprisingly. Not every character is a home run by any stretch of the imagination, but a massive improvement on its predecessor, absolutely. I don't think it's really going to end up being a hot take to say that The Way of Water is a better overall film than the first Avatar. Essentially, everything the first film does well, this film does just as well, but the thing that separates the two is what the sequel adds that the first film didn't have. The breathtaking visual effects going that next level, the simpler yet slightly more original story, the depth added to pre-existing one-dimensional characters, and the emotional weight that it packs that the first film was just missing. Avatar 2: The Way of Water is in every conceivable way a better film than the first Avatar. So, Avatar 2: The Way of Water, it is a flawed masterpiece. It has some slight issues that you could absolutely pick apart if you truly wanted to, but on the other hand, what this film sets out to excel in, it absolutely perfects. That's why I can't say it's a straight up masterpiece, because there are drawbacks to this Avatar formula when you compare it to other science fiction films. You just can't hold Avatar films up to the likes of James Cameron's other works such as Terminator 2 and Aliens. Those films are sci-fi masterpieces through and through. Avatar is like its own unique thing. It's not trying to be the second coming of Citizen Kane. It's a science fiction action blockbuster specifically designed to transport you to an entirely new world, with cutting-edge special effects to help sell the viewer in being completely entranced and transported to a world unlike any other. That's what Avatar is all about. That's what it is at its core. That's what this entire franchise has become. And The Way of Water just does it perfectly. A masterpiece of what it sets out to do, but a flawed masterpiece when compared to other works of the science fiction genre.